Hello fellow cinephiles, 90s Film Guru here. Thanks for joining me today. So I'm going to start to do different videos talking about certain films and the impact of those films. I'm more interested in doing lists and stuff like that, and I am with a mate of mine starting a podcast soon called Passion for the Film, which will be up and running hopefully soon. So that's some other things I'll be looking at doing. But today I really want to look at the impact that Scream had on the slasher genre and reinvented it and brought it back to life. And the subsequent films after that really were inspired by it, but really continued on what Scream created in the first place. Ultimately ending in 2000, and after that is ultimately when Saw comes in and reinvents it and does something really different with it. But before that we had Scream. Before Scream, the slasher genre was slowly dying or was ultimately dead, and all we were getting were sequels to very popular films like Halloween 6, which wasn't really great, Candyman 2, and there wasn't a lot of sort of slasher films around that were sort of people were taking note of. It was more a variety of different horror. But once Scream came out, it really sort of reinvigorated and reinvented the genre in such a great way. Kevin Williamson wrote the script, which everyone knows, you know, and there's different stories about how it began, that he was writing it one night, did it sort of all in one night and simplified it and sort of injected so many sort of horror films into it, like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and a variety of others, and really crafted really fascinating script. So fascinating that it was a bidding war on the script, which was called Scary Movie at the time. And it went out and everybody wanted it. Ultimately ended up with Miramax, as they saw the potential of it and could see what they could do with the film. Then they approached Wes Craven to direct, and at first he turned them down because he was trying to break free of the horror genre. He didn't want to be known just as a horror director and wanted to try different things. And those things didn't totally work out, and he decided to do this film in the end. And because he decided to do it, not only did this film reinvent the slasher genre, it reinvented Wes Craven's career in a lot of ways. Like obviously we had Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, which was brilliant, and New Nightmare, which was an evolution of that sort of character and story, which I really loved. And there were a variety of films throughout that I liked, but it wasn't until Scream that people sort of take notice. And it has such a legacy now, because he directed 4 films and went on to do other things as well, and worked a few more times with Kevin Williamson, which I thought was really great. But this film was really quite an extraordinary movie. I remember when it first came out, I didn't want to see it. I was about 12 years old at the time. I saw it on VHS, the video store, and I wasn't that intrigued in it. I picked up the cover and looked on the back, and it looked old, and at that time I wasn't really interested in old films, only the new films, so hence why Wes Craven's New Nightmare was the first Nightmare on Elm Street film I did see. But only I watched it, and I was just really affected by it. I thought it was shocking and brutal, but it really inspired my love for horror films in a lot of ways, to the point I started to write horror scripts and make short films. This film really had an impact on me, as well as an impact it had on the slasher genre in general. What the film did, that it took me a long time to realize from when I first saw it to now, ultimately, how much of a satire this film truly is, and how it makes fun of the slasher genre in a lot of ways. It makes fun of the tropes. You have the Randy character explaining the tropes of the film. You know, you can never have sex, you can never do drugs, and you never say, "I'll be right back," and all these sort of rules that he created. And that sort of turned everything on its head, and it played with every part of the genre. And there are sequences in Scream that always made me laugh, where you see Ghostface in the day, where he's in the supermarket or he's out in the forest, and I always thought this was stupid, but in the end it's because it's a satire. It's making fun of it. It's tongue-in-cheek in a lot of ways, and this film really established something unique and different, and it was really groundbreaking for its time, and it's still a beloved film even all these years later. And there's so many fan theories and variety of things, and it spawned, you know, what are we up to, 6 sequels with a 7th on the way. So it really had an impact on the horror genre in itself. It followed the sort of traditional aspects in a way. Group of kids, masked killer, they have to work out what's going on. It all comes to a head at a party where the final girl has to arise to the occasion and save the day. But in a way, this did something different with that as well, in that we didn't just have a final girl. We had Sidney Prescott, But we also had Randy who survived, and we had Gail Weathers. So it kind of was playing with that in a different way, and I thought that was interesting. Even Sydney's dad survived, so it's kind of like she isn't so much the final girl as it's the final group. So that sort of does something different as well. And there's so many things throughout the film where they're like that, where the characters speak a lot smarter than they seem to be, and they're very self-aware, very meta. And that was what really was a big impact for this film on the horror genre and the slasher genre, and just the horror audience out there. And it really cemented so much of bringing Wes Craven into the forefront once again in a great way. And it gave, Neve Campbell and Skeeter Ulrich and Matthew Lillard, and it all gave them, and David Arquette, these springboards to go on to do other things. And it's really the testament to what this film was able to accomplish, that they were able to do that. That's sort of a rundown. I've always wanted to do a bit more of a deep dive on Scream, but so many people talk about it. I just want to run through the highlights, and that's sort of what I'm talking about here. And this is a film, like I said, had an impact on me, and I've really loved the movie, and it's a film I return to time and time again. So now I want to look at the films that were inspired by it. Some of them were written by Kevin Williamson, who, Scream was his springboard, and ultimately went on to write a variety of other things that were really great. And one in particular that isn't quite a slasher film, but it works within the construct of a slasher film, is The Faculty. Robert Rodriguez directed it, but it was written by Kevin Williamson. And it sort of has all the sort of things you'd see in a slasher film, except the killer's not a masked man or a masked person, but is ultimately an alien that is able to manipulate people. And it sort of fits within that genre as well, so that was something he was able to do as well. But there are 4 other films that I put on this list. There are many more, obviously, that came out that inspired this. Some were worse than others and some were better than others. But I just want to sort of talk about the 4 main ones that have always stuck with me, the movies I've returned to and saw multiple times. So after success of Scream, ultimately a sequel was announced, and the sequel is probably my favourite out of all the Scream films, but we won't go too deep into that as I've looked at that film before. But there's just something quite powerful, the ability to do a sequel. But while they were looking at that, Kevin Williamson wrote the screenplay for I Know What You Did Last Summer, and that was due to his success with Scream. And as apparently the author of the book this I Know What You Did Last Summer is loosely based on, was really upset with what they did with it, because it wasn't a slasher film. It was just a group of teens, some tragic thing happened, and they're trying to move on with their life while trying to deal with the fact of this particular event happening to them and how they deal with that in general. But Kevin took that and made it into a slasher film where a group of kids accidentally run over someone, they dump them in the water thinking they're dead, they never talk about it, then years later they return to the town and ultimately getting letters and stuff like that saying, I know what you did last summer, hence the title. But there's just something about what Kevin did with this, and it really invented, and it sort of was continuing on from what Scream did. It was meta in certain aspects. It sort of played with the genre in interesting ways, and because of the particular scenes and death scenes in Scream, such as the Casey Becker death at the start or Tatum's death in the garage door, Kevin seemed to want to one-up himself, and they kind of tried to do that with this particular film. A lot of the deaths are kind of simple and done in shadows, but there's certain scenes that I really loved in this movie. Sarah Michelle Gellar's character, when she's about to walk up the stairs and we see the killer walk up into a room as she goes up, and then she wakes up in the morning and the hair's been cut off. All of those scenes are really cool, but it did differ a lot from the source material and which I guess the author of the book ultimately went on to do the TV series. But this was kind of really cemented in that similar thing to Scream. You had a group of kids, teens or college students, particularly in this one, like they did in Scream 2, and it's about them sort of working out what's going on and who's this person that thinks they know what they did last summer, and then coming together and being fractured, a fractured friend group due to what happened to them. What Kevin did really good with it is it took the myth of the hooked man and ultimately injected that into a film like this, and he really captured something great. And this is a film that not only was successful at the time, but has become since a cult classic slasher film. And it's one I return to. I know there are people who don't like it, but I really love it. I think the Sarah Michelle Gellar character is probably better than the Julie character, but I still really like that film. I like the horror to it, and like I said with Scream really inspired me to watch more of these films, and this was one I saw at the cinema, and I really love this movie, and I still love it, and I return to it time and time again. The essential plot and recreated something that resembled a 1980s slasher film, which was really cool. That's why I think that not only did Scream inspire, but really this was a continuation of the slasher genre slowly becoming big once again. It seems, especially Sarah Michelle Gellar's character, where she's on the run, she's running through this, she's in an alleyway, and there's some sort of festival or something on there. People are just there, and just as she's about to make it, the killer attacks her as the fireworks go off and they can't hear her die. It's what absolutely wonderful chase sequence, and that's another thing that Scream did. It created these chase sequences again. And it really tried to invest the audience back into it, and that's one of the great deaths. The only thing that lets the film down a little bit is this feels like a tacked on ending that's kind of dreamish like, and it'll be interesting to see what they do with the revival, reboot, reimagining, whatever they're going to come up with this new one, and how it will connect to the original film. But this is one film I really loved, and is definitely one that was talked about a lot when it came out, much like Scream. Next is Halloween H2O. Not only was this one of the best Halloween sequels that we had in quite some time. I have a soft spot for 4, but probably not the best example of Halloween film. But this sort of went back to the first 2, which are really great, and I really loved what they did with it. But they did sort of turn it into a simple, straight up slasher film. And Halloween had those elements, but it was a little different the way they did it. But this film sort of took that slasher idea film, obviously because of the success of Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and injected it into Halloween, having it set at one particular location. These are ultimately teens, but adults as well. And it's sort of going back to the Laurie Strode storyline that we saw in the second one that they really didn't return to until this film. And just some really great opening, there's some really great moments in the film, but it does feel like a slash film, and it's a product of Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. Some people don't like this. I think it's a great sequel, and there was an original version, I think, that Kevin Williamson originally wrote, and his story was much different, and that's kind of interesting. This is the third film where he was kind of involved in the script aspect of the movie. Jamie Lee Curtis is really wonderful in this film, and it's sort of talking about how Michael live and ultimately trying to seek her out. The first real look and introduction we had of Josh Hartnett, which is really cool. His hair maybe not cool, but it was cool to see him in this. And we had Michelle Williams, and it had Adam Arkin, and it even had Janet Leigh, Jamie Lee Curtis's mother. And it was a real throwback and a real nostalgic throwback to Psycho, as she was dressed similar, she had the same car, and it was really about Steve Miner bringing this to life. But this was a really great slasher film. This was really great. I remember when it came out, has since been released on 4K. It is, the mask is a little funny, as some of it's digital and it doesn't always look great, and the knife is kind of ridiculously long. But there's some really cool moments in the film. The opening sequence where he goes to find the files to find out where Laurie is, and ultimately the nurse is killed. That was in the first 2 films, which I thought was really cool. And just how the Laurie Strode character was starting to be affected from nightmares and things, and the impact that having this person chase her had on her, and how she's trying to move forward but still trapped in that sort of fear that he may one day return. And he ultimately does, and it's this great final showdown between Michael Myers and Laurie Strode, and it's just wonderful to watch. And this has that, but it does feel a lot like Scream. So this was another one obviously inspired by Scream. So just lastly, the other way it was kind of like a slasher film was Michael wasn't this mindless killer anymore. He was sort of a bit smarter. The way he gets a car at the start with his mother and daughter, and have to stop at the toilet, stop to go to the toilet in this sort of a middle of nowhere. And usually in Michael Myers' story he would kill them, but in this he didn't. It was like he was going, okay, I don't need to kill them, I just need the keys. And then when he arrives at this private school where Laurie Strode's teaching, and the way he parks the car at the front, and LL Cool J's character comes in and can't find whose car it is, and he's already in there, and just the way they do that is really great, and it just feels like he's a much smarter character in certain aspects of the film. So that's why it sort of differs from your traditional Halloween film and dips more into the classic 80s slasher film. Now, in the same year, we had Urban Legends. This was another one that was inspired by Scream, and this was one that was directed by Australia's own Jamie Blanks, and he would go on to do another horror film called Valentine, which wasn't as well received as Urban Legend. And as the title suggests, for those who haven't seen it, which I'd be surprised if you haven't, is the film really focuses on a killer killing people in the style of particular urban myths and urban legends. Had a great cast. Jared Leto was in it. Alicia Witt was fine in it. Rebecca Gayheart was really good in it as well. Michael Rosenbaum, who's kind of fun in the film. And two horror icons with Danielle Harris and Robert Englund playing a professor talking about urban legends, which I thought was wonderful, and he's really great in the film. He's not in a lot of it, but the scenes he has are fantastic. And he's so far removed from Freddy, but I love what he does in it, and it's such a nostalgic thing to have him and Danielle Harris in it, playing against the particular type of characters they played in those particular horror films they're involved in. And I love it's set at college, and it's something that Scream 2 would do as well. And it even has like Joshua Jackson in it, sort of making fun of Pacey from Dawson's Creek, which was interesting, and its tie into Kevin Williamson, who created that show, and so there's sort of a connection with Kevin Williamson once again. It feels like everything that came after Scream he touched in some way, whether writing the script, having a concept or idea for original story on it, or having actors that were part of something else he did. Another actor in a little cameo sort of sequence is Brad Dourif as well, and he's really great playing a similar character to what he played in another film, a character with a stutter, and he's part of the opening sequence is really great. See, Jamie Blanks was a big inspiration for me when I was younger and wanted to make horror films, and I really loved Urban Legend, and I remember seeing it at the cinema and the impact that it had on me, and he's always someone I've been interested. He's only made 3 films, but I would love to see him come back and do more, and as someone who should have been more celebrated. But I guess most of his films are in the slasher genre, and the slasher genre is slowly dying once again, and hopefully may be reinvigorated slightly with Scream 7, but we'll have to wait and see for that one. And obviously with films like Hard Eyes and things like that, they're trying to bring back the genre in a certain way. But I'd love to see him return. And he got chosen to make this film based on a short film he made, a horror film, and you can really start to see the way he plays with this particular movie. The shots he uses, the music, the way he cuts things together. And it's something that is not only an interesting story, but the way it's shot is really fascinating as well. And there's a lot of humour and satire in it. And it was really satirical in that way. And sort of playing with the genre once again, much like Scream did. So it's another one I was really inspired by. And I found it very interesting how quickly they pumped out Halloween H2O and Urban Legend in the same year. It was kind of like you had Scream, and then they pushed in I Know What You Did Last Summer, and obviously a sequel to Scream 2, and then it sort of just flowed down, and then we had more and more coming out each year than one a year, and I thought that's kind of the power of what Scream had at the time. And like Scream, Urban Legend has a young cast and a masked killer, and they have to work out what's going on. The motives are quite, why the person's doing it makes sense. There is obviously a debate, much like there was with Scream 5, how this Rebecca Gayheart could be the one doing all these physical lifting things and doing these things that are kind of a bit unbelievable. But what I realised, this is going off on tangent a little bit, with the film, the last time I saw Urban Legends, is it's a story. It itself became an urban legend. Because when we get to the end of the film, there's a character who finishes up telling the story of it. So, not saying it didn't happen, but maybe it didn't happen the way this person was saying. And even Rebecca Gayheart's character, completely different, is there. And she goes, that's not what happened. And it kind of makes you realise that maybe what we saw wasn't completely all true. Maybe it was someone's story embellishing on this thing, but the movie itself became an urban legend. Very meta. And I thought that if that doesn't connect to Scream, I don't know what does. There are people who believe Urban Legend is just a Scream ripoff, but like I'm saying here, it inspired things. Of course they're going to take something from Scream because of how it reinvented things. I don't think this is a complete ripoff at all. It just follows the same sort of tropes and variety of things that come out of the slasher genre. That's all, and that's why it feels like a ripoff, but it's actually just an extension of what was created in the new direction with the slasher film. The last one I'm going to end on came out in 2000, so it just kind of fits in what I usually review, 1989 to 2000. But it's important to talk about this film as it sort of was the beginning of the end of the slasher genre that Scream had created. It was the film that tried to do something different, but sort of wasn't as successful and wasn't able to do what Scream wholly did. And that is Cherry Falls. This was once again directed by Australian director Jeffrey Wright. And look, as a film, it's not too bad. It has a solid cast. You got Michael Biehn, Brittany Murphy, Jay Murr, Jesse Bradford. So these were kind of sort of known actors. Michael Biehn obviously being the main one noticed the most, and he plays the sheriff of the town. And Brittany Murphy plays his daughter. And Brittany Murphy in this was before she, really took off with like Clueless and movies like that. And she kind of always played a quirky, sort of odd character. And she sort of did the similar thing in the first Prophecy movie with Christopher Walken. And she's a little quirky and strange, but that's what kind of makes her stand out and makes her an interesting final girl in the movie, is because she's just sort of a bit quirky and odd. But it works. It really works for what they're going for. And that's why it makes it a bit of a quirky and interesting thing. But like Scream, it really took on the same sort of thing. It's set at high school. Has sort of group of teens have to work out what's going on. The sheriff's at a loss, much like Dewey is in the first Scream. And just trying to piece things together and work out what's going on. This is a little, and like Scream, it has a backstory. It has a reason why the killer is doing what they're doing that connects to the main character. And this is another example of it. And this did try something different. In most sort of horror films, even what they talk about in Scream, if you're a virgin, you live. You're never going to die. The killer doesn't kill virgins. Where this flipped it on its head. If you're a virgin, the killer will kill you. And so it sort of pushes this ludicrous concept that towards the end, it's not a party, but it's kind of like the more all the teens coming together to hurry up and have sex so the killer doesn't come after him in the house. And I thought that was an interesting, to flip that a little bit, an interesting thing. And some of the death scenes are kind of interesting as well. But it's a very odd film that kind of just doesn't work. And it isn't in my opinion, the same caliber as Scream. I know what you did last summer, Urban Legend, or H2O. But it's its own thing, and it really was the end of the slasher sort of genre that Scream created. And it's the film that not a lot of people talk about. It's definitely worth watching if you haven't seen it, just for some of its silliness and the way they played with who the killer was and sort of messed with that. And it was kind of meta in a way, and it was kind of silly when they were talking about everyone having to have sex so that the killer doesn't kill them. But it has an interesting ending, and the killer's a bit goofy, I think. The way that character looks and how they try and throw you off who it could be. And with a quirky and interesting thing, it still follows the sort of slasher genre. It just tried something a little too different and fell out. And ultimately that would become the end of the new reinvigorated slasher genre, with this sort of film causing it to come to an end. Yes, we had slasher films after this. Valentine was one in the early 2000s, and it's a solid film, and like what Jamie Blanks did with Urban Legend, it has some good moments in it. It's just not as great as Urban Legend. And then, like I said, Saw would come in and do something completely different. And I think the slasher genre is slowly coming back now. But I just don't think it has the same impact that Scream did. But we wouldn't have all the slasher films that we had, that are ones I mentioned, but also the newer ones like Freaky or Happy Death Day, or Hard Eyes that we're getting now, or a continuation of the Scream moves in a different direction. It was the beginning. It was the first film to really do these things, and it reinvented it, and it is still something that people take from to make other films. And pretty much anything Christopher Landon did in his earlier career or the horrors he's done are very inspired by Scream in so many ways. And not only those films, but there's other films as well. Concept in the slasher genre, and just put it into other movies. More of a thriller aspect to it. And it's something that has longevity and has really lasted a long time. To the point there's so many YouTubers seeing Scream for the first time and really loving it and loving the Scream movies. And that's a testament to Kevin Williamson's writing, but also the way Wes Craven created the films and what he did with it and how he had fun with it and how it just inspired so much. And like I said, I'm a huge Scream fan, and it really inspired me to do a lot of things as well. But those are the films. Those are the other films that I think are really important that followed Scream, and there probably are others that people may know. You can put in the comments below and let me know if there's other films you think should be in that list. But these are the ones I sort of pick through, and these are the ones that I still really like. Even though Cherry Falls isn't great, I do like it. It's something a bit different. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom. Please follow me on Letterboxd and Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.